along, right? So it is very, very difficult for us to actually solve the problem as a whole, right? So we have to break it into parts. So that understanding the domain, the problem statement, and breaking down is basically analysis. And synthesis is once we have broken the products into different parts, how do we conquer? How do we fix it and combine it to solve the purpose? So for that, we have three ways. One is we use techniques or methods. So what is techniques? It's basically a formal procedure for that produce results, right? So when we say formal procedure, can anyone does anyone know what do we mean by formal procedures? It's simply like algorithms, right? Or simple programs, what or a like or like it's like algorithms are basically procedures or formal procedures, right? So algorithms are techniques, and the collection of algorithms that we apply across a software product is a methodology, right? And what are tools? So basically our software uses a lot of like collection of algorithms to achieve, right? You cannot achieve a problem statement using just one algorithm. We have to have a multiple algorithms, right? And tools are basically some instrument or systems that actually help us to achieve the problem statement using the technique, right? So like you can use pipelines, you can use gate. All of these are basically tools or systems that help us achieve the problem statement when we have when we know what is algorithm to be used, right? So why software engineering? So basically if you look, these are out of all the projects, projects created, 45% of the projects which was delivered were never successfully used. That means either it had too many bugs, or it never faced like it never satisfied the customer requirements, right? So it was never used successfully used. So 45 30% the customer or stakeholders are paid, but due to over budgeting or over crossing the budget, it was not even delivered, and they had to just shelf it off, right? And 20% of the project, if you look at 20% was used, but a lot of the code had to be rewritten, and later on it was discovered that it had to be abandoned, right? So just 5% of the projects could be reused. Just 5% of all the projects uh, delivered. So it 5%, 2% of the, I mean, only 2% of projects we were able to use just like that. We as in the entire in the world, and 3% with some refactoring and some like with some rework. So now we know. So it is very, very difficult. Software engineering is not a simple it's very, very difficult, right? So to ensure we increase the number of projects that actually meet the customer satisfaction without over budgeting or crossing the or able to deliver within the time to the market, that is why we have to apply for the software engineering principles, so we actually deliver something useful. Does anyone have any questions so far? So okay, so if you look at software lifecycle, right? It basically lifecycle can be broken down into stages, right? A stage is basically it moves from one phase to another phase until we reach the finished product. And the sequence of these single stages is called a life cycle, right? So if you can have multiple phase one, phase two, phase three, and then each one you have to iterate through and then reach the final end product, right? So that are called stages, and the collection of each and every single stage is basically called life cycle. So what are the different life cycle models? Can anyone guess? Let's take a minute or two for members to guess. You can unmute or you can type it in the chat, whichever is. So feel free to unmute and tell to anybody. What are the different life cycle models known to you? No one? Okay. So there are basically different water life cycle models. One is okay, yeah, Akash, waterfall, spiral, agile, great V model, incremental, iterative. Yep, awesome. Yeah, good, great, Akash and Ashok. Yeah, that's definitely these are the models. So, waterfall model is basically the oldest model that is known to you, like which was a disciplined approach on how to uh, create software, right? So it's very, very straightforward. You basically have one phase, you complete the first phase, then we will go into each model a bit deeper in the next few slides. First, let's go see which are the different models. So waterfall model, we just go is a very, very straightforward. We finish one phase, move on to next phase, move on to next phase, and model is the product is developed, right? So uh, does anybody know what's the V-shaped model? And okay, so V-shaped model is basically something that grew out of waterfall model. So in waterfall model, the problem was there was no emphasis on testing. So V model had emphasized a lot of testing. So basically, for each stage in the waterfall model, you would have a similar testing phase. So it is very similar to waterfall model, except you would be having a testing phase leading to a V shape, right? Except for the product development, where yeah. Uh, the next one is iterative model. Uh, does anyone want to explain what is iterative model or incremental model? Okay, so in iterative models, so far in waterfall and in V-shaped model, we used to take the entire set of known requirements from the customer and we used to deliver it as a product, right? In iterative model, what we do is if there's say 10 requirements, we would initially take a small subset. So we would take 2 or 3 requirements and we would implement that. It would be tested, it would be evaluated. So iteratively, you would be working on the customer requirement. That is the iterative model. Instead of working on all customer requirements, you would be working iteratively on a subset of customer requirements, right? That is our iterative model. And the spiral model is basically a project, is basically a model where you would be having 4 phases and you would keep iteratively going through multiple rounds of increment. So the advantage of spiral model is you can have a very high customized product because we would be getting the feedback and keep on building the product based on that, right? That is a spiral model. Uh, I think everybody would know about agile model. So does anyone want to explain what is agile? Or does anyone know what is the agile model? No one? Okay. So basically, agile model, what we do is we take a time limit, a cycle. So we take a time span of 2 months or 2 weeks or 4 weeks. It really depends on team to team or company to company or like organization to organization. They take a cycle, and during that cycle, we would take a requirement. We would basically develop something and test it and deploy. So within this, every cycle, you would be having some working product, right? So this ensures like the customer keeps getting some value. So on iterative one, the cycle one, you would be having a model one, a feature with some number of features. In next cycle, you would be having iteratively, you would have worked on an like some a new feature for the customer, a new feature. So every cycle, the customer value keeps getting added, right? So this is very much preferred because one, it is you can requirements can keep changing, and the agile model is meant to adapt to requirements, like changing requirements, right? So let's talk a bit uh, in more detail about the waterfall model. So it is a very simple way. It just basically activities are performed in a sequence. So one stage, result of one stage goes to the next. It is very small, simple, right? But the issue is it is unworkable because in the real world, requirements keep changing. So you cannot you have to keep iterating, right? So the main flaw was that we assumed, the assumption was that each stage can be completed before the next stage. Does anyone know where would the waterfall model work, for which domain? No. Okay, so something where we actually know all the requirements, such as hospital domain, medical field domain. So in that field, the requirements don't keep changing, right? So you have to know the. Yeah, exactly, Ashok. Where all the requirements are known, such as the medical field, right? You cannot keep changing, so you need to have all the requirements and deliver as per that specification. So that is where waterfall model would work the best, right? So these are the main stages in a waterfall model. So the first one is a requirement where you actually gather all the requirements. The second stage is analysis. Basically, the requirements are completely studied. The overall architecture is done, and you decide what are the components. How would your system be, right? And then you would go into design is how would your systems be modeled? What would be the components? What would be the detailed algorithm of how would the systems interact with each other? And then finally comes your implementation, where you actually start coding, where you actually start creating the infrastructure, uh, is where you would work at the implementation phase. And finally comes a testing. So testing is basically we would test all have is our implementation working as expected with requirement, right? So we would have a specification requirement document that basically specifies these are the requirements, right? So we would be testing, are these working as expected?